Seek above all for a game worth playing. Oh baby, it's witchcraft contagious. I felt it for ages. We're out of these cages in this house of mages. It's witchcraft, it's dangerous. Beware of these pages. There's spells of all flavors in this house of mages. In this house of mages. In this house of mages.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Make Yoga Magic Again, the House of Mages podcast. My name's Daniel Arulian Cumming. Now, this topic, as you can tell by the name of it, is only a small one, only a small topic. It's something that I've wanted to talk about for a while, and I have in-person conversations, but it's something that I've avoided talking about because it can just be taken the wrong way in so many levels. And I think that's why it's really important to talk about, because it's a thing that really should be bringing us all together more than anything, but it seems to be the thing that divides humanity. Look at history more than ever. And it's this idea of what is God, or who is God? You know, what does the term God even mean? And the funny thing is that when people mostly talk about this word, I'm just going to call it a word because it's trying to describe something, very little, if ever, I hear, what do you mean by God? Can you explain how you view this thing that you're talking about? And I think that's the biggest issue when it comes to how much we as humans disagree with each other, fight each other, and just don't really see where each other is coming from, because we assume the words that they are using are perceived the same way that we perceive that word. Yeah? So, for example, imagine if you had a cup, right? You only ever had one cup that you used to drink out of, and it didn't have a handle. It was like really shallow and more like maybe most people will call a bowl, and that's all you ever saw as a cup. Then you meet someone that the only time that they've ever seen a cup is more like a kind of teacup, like it's got a handle and it's like a really tall one, and maybe it's got elaborate designs in it or something like that, as opposed to your really plain cup. And then you ask for a cup and they give you that, and you're like, that's not a cup. They're like, yeah, it is. What do you mean it's not a cup? And you get into a big fight about it because you just want a cup, and neither of you can understand what the other person is trying to say. But instead of saying, can I have a cup? And, you guys fighting each other, what would be constructive to say if they said that's not a cup? Be like, okay, how do you perceive a cup? Can you explain to me what you use a cup for? I use it to put liquid in. So that I can hold it and drink it. I'll be like, oh, well, this is this thing. It's interesting. Like, how do you perceive it? Oh, it's kind of like this. Or, oh, we kind of call that a bowl. It's kind of like a bowl, but oh, that's really interesting. Maybe we should share our ideas and maybe expand each other's ideas of cups. I know this may sound silly, but to me, these kind of conversations, when people are fighting over similar ideas, like we have religions that essentially come from the same book, and, that is also written by humans. So it's such a multifaceted conversation. But I guess I want to preface it by saying my intention is not to discredit any particular belief system. It's actually the opposite. It's to help us try to understand each other, that at the crux of it, we're all just trying to do our best to figure out this wild, crazy cosmos that we've all been dropped into, whether it's against our will or we chose to be here. I'm not sure. I can't remember. If I had many past lives before, I like it here. But I also like asking questions and unraveling things because, I think at the crux of it, we're all trying to do very similar things, but we've all had different experiences. We've all been told that, it is a certain way, and we're seeing everything from a pre-constructed lens. And that's essentially what spirituality is. It's trying to unravel what this mysterious universe is by making sense of things and categorizing it and putting it into a certain story behind it as well. And if you haven't read *Sapiens* by Yuval Harari, I can't remember the author's name, but it's called *Sapiens*. It's a very famous book. It is amazing, and he calls humans meaning-making machines or label-making machines, which we are. We have to make sense of things, and we often fear or get frustrated with, or we get very uncomfortable with things that we can't label and put into a category. But the issue with that is, as soon as we label something, it takes on all these preconceived ideas that could be not only very incorrect from the reality of it, but is most likely vastly different from how someone else perceives that word. And he talked about religion being an example, like a word for it would be a collective fiction. So when he says collective fiction, or how I perceive collective fiction, is that, these things happen in the world, right? So, imagine, we were in our ancestors' times and, storms are happening, things are happening, all these things are going right sometimes and wrong sometimes, and we're trying to find the patterns, we're trying to find the meanings behind things, and then to conceptualize these things, we start to weave narratives around them, and then as we pass these things on, we also try to make it as simple as possible and make it interesting and memorable as possible. Hence, these things turn into stories, which get weaved into myths, and this gets weaved into what we call mythic thinking, which is actually essential for us to function as humans, because when we get to certain sizes of our tribes or groups, we need to have a cohesive belief or reason to be banding together in order to function efficiently. And that's what, religion and this common belief or this collective fiction can do for us. The issue then is when we disagree on fundamental values, aspects, or ideas that can't coexist. And this is ironic because, as we see from, different strains of like Abrahamic religions, which essentially all evolved from the same book, they branched off in so many different directions and then branched out again and again and again. But we not only see this in the kind of Western Abrahamic religions, we see this in Tantra, for example, that, they all kind of stemmed from similar things, but they branched out in different directions because, through studying and through sharing and having experiences with these practices, they came to maybe slightly or very different conclusions. The differences is, can we allow these different ideas to coexist? And I think that's the main thing that I've found doing my research on the Tantrik traditions, in that a lot of these not only coexisted, but they also, met up and shared and had philosophical, logical discussions, as did the ancient Greeks, and a lot of different cultures, I'm sure, did this. But it's when a belief system and a religion has no room and no permission for anything else that contradicts it to exist, this is extremely problematic. And this is what I'm trying to get at. Again, I'm not trying to dismiss other religions or beliefs. I'm just asking you to ask questions about this and try to give you a new perspective that might hopefully just shift the narrative to, if you're in one of these monotheistic religions or not, or whatever your belief system is, hopefully making it a little bit more accepting of others' belief systems, because we're all part of the same thing. So from a tantric viewpoint, or at least what I understand as a tantric viewpoint, is that the word God can be used to describe this thing that encompasses everything else, right? And so if you think of anything happening, whether it's right there in the room that you're in, whether it's you doing something, whether it's someone across the other side of the world doing something, whether it's something happening on a planet or a galaxy far, far away, what is the thing that is encompassing all those other things? And it's tricky to talk about, because when I say encompassing or containing all the other things, we tend to think that there must be something outside of that. But then what is the thing that is encompassing the thing that encompasses the things? It's a tricky thing to talk about, right? Because we only have limited language, and that's why we get so confused and can have arguments about spiritual matters, because it's intangible and it's a concept that sometimes our mind as humans can't really grasp efficiently or intellectually. So what I'm trying to get across is just for you to think for a moment, is just imagine whatever you want to call it, but everything that has ever existed, everything that will ever exist, and everything that exists right now, all interlaced in this webwork, this tapestry, this kind of liquid, this moving, shaping, self-intelligent kind of mass of chaos and order, of everything and nothing. That is, I guess, what I would say my kind of viewpoint and a tantric viewpoint is of the word God. It is the thing that encompasses and connects all the other things and holds all the other things, right? And so that, I think, is different to how a lot of people perceive the word God when they say it, especially if you come from a kind of Christian background, because we give this word a sense of identity, even a gender, a lot of the time, and an agenda. So gender as in male, and an agenda as in they have goals, they have values, they have beliefs, they have things that they're trying to accomplish. And this is tricky, because if it is the thing that encompasses all things, then essentially it is also the thing that it is trying to fight against, if that makes sense. So I'm sure we can all agree to some extent, no matter what your belief is, that all of these religious books and doctrines have been written by humans, right? So you may believe that they were channeled by some divine essence or non-human essence, but they were still written by human hands, right? And that's the thing about having these conversations. If you do believe that these ideas are real or are true or are the core essence of existence, then nothing of what I say or what anybody else says should be able to convince you otherwise. If anything, unpacking it and talking about it and really getting to know the root and the behind the scenes parts of this belief system should only make this stronger, or to help you have a better relationship with it. Don't you agree? And you don't have to agree with me, but that's the way I see it. And so it's just interesting how, and that's what has kind of prompted this, because I've had a few conversations about this in certain ways recently, and I notice how people's bodies tense up and they kind of like snap or get a little bit frustrated and are so quick to defend their beliefs. I even had someone say to me yesterday when I was talking to her, she worded, "You can't take this away from me," like I was trying to take her whole belief system away or take something away from her. And that language is really interesting, because if something can be taken away, then what is left behind it? And, you know, this will be, and this already is, an interesting episode, and it may seem like I'm just going on tangents and talking things, but the way I like to see it is, because this is such a difficult thing to talk about, we almost can't say the exact thing because the thing that we're talking about isn't tangible. And so the example I like to give is, have you seen those drawings where they don't actually paint the picture they intend on painting, but they paint everything around it? And so all that's left is the picture. So imagine that they were painting a silhouette of a woman, right? So they might start painting all the edges around, and, you know, initially it just looks like a pile of, it looks like nothing that you can figure out. But then eventually you realize that all that they haven't painted makes a perfect silhouette of a woman's body. And this is what I'm talking about. So sometimes, in order to get the message across we're trying to give, or get the image across, we can't actually paint the thing, but what we can do is paint all the things around it, hoping that eventually it will create an image or something tangible that makes sense to you. Hopefully that makes sense to you, and hopefully it gives a little bit of permission here for me to talk around the topic a little bit, because as I mentioned a million times already, it is a tricky one. So coming back to this tantric idea or viewpoint of the word God, and from here onwards I'm just going to use the word universe in place of the word God. And I think of the universe as the sum total of everything that has been, will be, will ever be, and even though that I see there might be lots of parallel multiverses, I still think of there must be something that's still encompassing all those different pieces. And I personally have a lot of resistance to the word God, because I think it is such a loaded word and has so many preconceived ideas that it's related to the kind of Abrahamic Christian God. And what I'm trying to explain in this is that the word can and not only is used in other contexts and that, but I'm inviting the conversation that whenever you hear someone use the word, to ask them, what do they mean by the word God? And try to do it with compassion, and because I really believe that this can only bring us closer together as a humanity, because I do believe we are all from the same source or the same universe. And that's why I like this tantric idea, because the idea behind it is we're all part of this big kind of, you could say like pool or ocean or big vast blob or endless kind of, maelstrom of consciousness that at some point wanted to experience itself in different ways. And so in order to experience itself, it made different vantage points in order to see itself, right? So imagine if you're, you're part of everything, right? I know it's difficult to imagine. This is why people do plant medicine journeys, because, if you've done one, you might have a little bit of a sense of embodied idea of what this may feel like. But it's also important to break it down and try to discuss this rationally if we can. So we are the universe. We are all the universe experiencing itself from different vantage points. And I mentioned this briefly in the last podcast. And I just want to mention that the last podcast I did about the chakras, even though I may promote things in a slightly way that is meant to provoke a response, but it's to provoke you diving deeper into it. And I wasn't actually invalidating the chakras. I was actually, if anything, validating them more and trying to breathe back the essence of yoga back into everything, and also help you all understand what I mean by magic and how important that is. Tangent, but I just wanted to mention that. So this idea of the universe experiencing itself really gives a reconnection of not only every part of existence as the same form of the divine, but also when you look at someone else, they're also a different part of you looking at you, experiencing you, which is them, from a different vantage point. And this is why, I'm doing another podcast next about new age spirituality and all these ideas, because they're terms that are thrown around a lot, right? But they're quite hard to grasp, in that, we say that the essence of the universe is love. But again, what is love? Everyone might have a different idea of what love is. And I think the risk that we have of starting to label, the universe or God as a very finite being, as maybe, this bearded man that's, in another dimension, judging everybody, in that it's basically saying that certain parts of existence are inherently good or bad. And this is an issue because, it's tricky, and I don't want to say anything that could make you think that I'm saying it's okay to go and do horrible things to people, because I don't believe that at all. But what especially the kind of left-hand path Tantrika were trying to get across to people is that everything is part of God. Everything is the divine, whether that's a beautiful flower or the waste that you leave in the toilet, and that may sound ridiculous to some, but it's all part of the same thing. It's all part of this vast intelligence that we call the cosmos, or call source, or call the universe, or call God. And we have what we call it as a contracted viewpoint of that, right? So imagine trying to operate as everything at once. You can't experience everything at once. So the idea, an example I'll give is if, and I've done this many times and learned the hard way, it doesn't really work. Imagine you have a few different foods and you absolutely love the taste of these foods. And so you think, well, I'm going to make this even better by eating all these different foods at once. And it doesn't work. It almost cancels out all the flavors, right? So some things are designed to be experienced isolated from each other. Another example is I do music production and sound engineering and things like that. There's certain frequencies of sounds that if you put them together, you would think it would just make it louder, right? So for example, you've got two snares and you put them together, I love this snare sound and I love this snare sound. I'm going to put them both together and that would just make this awesome, even better snare sound. Instead, for some reason, you can barely hear it and it doesn't sound anything like the original sound, because this weird thing happens where the sound cancels itself out. And I think we, as a very limited viewpoint, experiencing the world and experiencing reality, is the way it's supposed to be, because some things are more potent experienced in isolation. Another example, right? So I've done a bit of massage before in the past, and I've both experienced and done this with people. If you've had a massage, you know how good it is to be massaged. And so you may think that, I'm just going to, it'd be so much better to have 10 people massage me at once. Whereas that can be like sensory overload, where you can't actually enjoy any particular part of it because it's, too much. And, you might enjoy this but it's also different. It's a different kind of enjoyment. For example, right now listening to this, if you were to just focus on lightly and softly brushing your fingertips across your thumb, one by one, how potent that sensation is. Whereas if you were to do that mixed with like rolling around on the ground or just doing a bunch of other things, your awareness is kind of spread throughout all those different points. And so you can get better and better through meditation, through different practices of kind of expanding your consciousness to experience more and receive more at once. But everything kind of has a balance factor. And I think the more expanded your awareness is, or the more things you throw in the mix to experience, the less potent those things are. And so if this is a principle of the universe, then if you wanted to experience something super potently, you would bring that into a contracted, isolated form. And what I'm meaning by that is, think how vast the universe is, and how, you on this human at a tiny point on a huge planet, flying through space in a huge galaxy, in a huge solar system, in an even bigger galaxy, in possibly like a vast infinite universe, how small, and when I say contracted, I mean like kind of finite. If you had a whole map, right, of the world, and you just focused on one tiny little country, say Mauritius, just because I know it's a tiny little country. I'm pretty sure it's a country anyway. Apologies if you're from Mauritius and it's more of a state or a territory or something of the sort. If you don't know where Mauritius is, it's just kind of near Madagascar. I haven't been there, but I know quite a few people who have, and apparently it's beautiful. Big tangent. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that point would be a contracted piece of the bigger map, right? And so experiencing the whole world at once from space, looking at it, you must admit that it's very different to experiencing that one point where you are right now, in the house or in a forest or something like that. And even so, if you're in a forest and you're just walking around the whole forest looking at everything, it's amazing. I love doing that. But have you ever just taken a moment and sat down and maybe just watched one leaf, or watched a caterpillar or an ant just crawling across the ground? And maybe that's something so small and so insignificant. I'm doing air quotes with insignificant because everything's significant, that you didn't notice before, but now seems so vast and so potent. And, I used to, if you've ever seen Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, I used to love that movie as a kid, because I sometimes imagined as a kid, what it would be like to be an ant, or to be experiencing a garden. My grandma used to have the most beautiful gardens, and I kind of wish sometimes I was a tiny little ant or something, because the gardens would be so much more vast and so much more, expansive and all that sort of stuff, because I was so small, if that makes sense. And I think that, if I was the universe, which I guess I am from a tantric view, and, I saw the possibilities of the entire cosmos, I would want to also experience it from that more finite point of view, because it, as I mentioned, from the ant's point of view, that garden. So, I want to, I want to experience my garden like in the perspective of an ant, if that's making sense. So the next part of this infinite mysterious puzzle is, what do we do with this information? What can we do with this viewpoint? And that is the point, in that our viewpoint on the world will change how we show up in it, and will ultimately change how we live our lives, and how we interact with others. And that is why, again, I'll come back to what I said at the start, in that if our belief system cannot coexist with other people's belief system, then it's going to cause issues. And that there's so many ways that you can have your belief system without imposing it on others. And there's a difference between, inviting people into your world and into your viewpoint, and just sharing that, it's like you like this viewpoint because of this. And I would much prefer those conversations in that, like, I really like this viewpoint because of this, and it makes sense to me because of this and this, rather than this is the truth and you're going to suffer for eternity if you don't agree with me, because you're wrong and you'll be punished for it. And to be honest, if that is the truth, then, and it's imposed by some sort of awareness or consciousness or deity that has set those rules, then I personally wouldn't be very keen to spend eternity with that deity, because, and especially if you unpack a lot of the myths, the Abrahamic myths around these deities, and, again, it's so hard to say this without offending people, and I'm just trying to invite ideas, because, maybe the person that, wrote these or transmitted or channeled these ideas got it wrong. And, and that's the thing as well. These religions do evolve over time. And so if they evolve over time and they change the rules and they change the actual, like, things that are accepted and not accepted and right and wrong, then they're not that set in stone. And they're not that fundamental part of a universe. And so if some rules can be changed, why can't all the rules be changed? And I think it's just important to question these in who are you giving authority to decide what is the right and wrong things? Who is this person to say that they speak for the universe or that they speak for God? And it's usually the most charismatic, everything that we have in this world is because we have all agreed to it. Money, for example, right? Well, you've probably heard me talk about NFTs and crypto and, money before. But the thing is, the money that you have in your, wallet or purse, or the numbers that you have on your screen, on your phone, or, the computer, or that the bank has on their screen, is real because we all believe, we all have agreed by some spoken or unspoken social contract that this stuff is real. And so it gives it power. And that's the thing, this, people talk about digital money as in not being real, but it's based on a real concept, and that's exchanging goods for other goods, or a way to exchange goods. And so I feel like, and again, I've been told by people that I'm over apologetic in some of my podcasts, which, I value everyone's opinion. And that's the thing, like I know I keep saying this, but I want to reiterate it because it is such a controversial topic and people can get emotional about their belief systems in that I want this to bring us closer together as humans. Again, I'm not trying to say you're wrong or divide us. And I'm actually trying to rectify issues because, I look at history and how religion has divided us. And I think if we can all just find some sort of mutual respect and understanding and find some middle ground that we can all be like, oh, I actually get where you're coming from now. And we don't have to kill each other because we call the universe a different name or that we have slightly different values. We can all do our thing over here. We kind of prefer the color red over here. So we're just going to live in a red city. And, I know you guys like blue, can't understand why you like blue because blue's a hideous color, but you guys can live in your blue city. And then sometimes we'll hang out in the purple city, when we're kind of overlapping and, I may have weird analogies, but this is how ridiculous it is to me sometimes that we're fighting over these kind of things. Because we're all trying to do the same thing. Again, I'm repeating myself, but I think it's important that I repeat myself sometimes so you don't misunderstand me. Anyway, on to the next part of it. So the next piece of this that I want to talk about is, I guess, the three main ideas of how we can perceive the universe that apply to most of the world's religions in some shape or form, and can actually vary how those strands of the religion view the world and the cosmos, right? So there's monotheism, which is essentially the belief that there is only one deity or one god or one truth to the universe, and that basically everything else is invalid. There is also henotheism, which I find isn't talked about a lot, right? So I'll talk about that in a second, but the next one is what we call polytheism, which is the belief that there's many different deities, many different gods, goddesses, and we kind of view all of these as level on a playing field, right? In the way that they kind of all have similar powers, but they all kind of represent different aspects. And they're all valid and they're all real to a certain extent. And I'll unpack what real means soon as well. But henotheism is interesting because it's kind of a mix in between. It's accepting or validating that there might be many different gods or goddesses or deities, but choosing to view one in particular as the, I guess, true or initial or primordial source of all the others, right? And we see this a lot in the Tantrik traditions, in that, we've got, the entity like Shiva Shakti is actually one being, the idea of the original divine cosmos, but then that can split into what we call the divine masculine and the divine feminine. But it was actually originally a kind of non-binary androgynous entity. There's a name for the god, I don't want to call it god or goddess, so deity, and I can't remember the name of it now. It's obviously a Sanskrit name. Can't remember it now, but it was originally a non-binary deity. But different tantric traditions choose to worship God or worship, and when I say worship, it's devote or see the framework, or at least call it by name, by different versions of this. So some might call Shiva the entire cosmos, right? So Shiva is the entire cosmos, but then Shiva can also show up as the more contracted, anthropomorphized form of the meditators, or a lot of tantric traditions prefer to see the universe as a goddess, more of the Shakti version, and might say Kali is the universe, Kali is the cosmic womb. She births everything and then eats everything. And, some people are like, oh my God. But, that's essentially what the universe does. It births things and then things die and pass away and retransform and remanifest into different things. And so that's what I'm trying to get across, in that, we have all these different deities or ideas of deities, or we have these archetypes that embody different aspects, right? But they can be seen as all emanating from the same source. And even in Christian mythology, we call it a monotheistic belief system. But I mean, you have many different angels and even like demons and like all these different essentially like demigods or entities in the framework, but yet we call it monotheism, but they're all kind of emanations from the one God. And it's interesting when we start to apply this lens of seeing God or seeing the universe as everything, encompassing everything, right? Because then we fall into issues in that if the Christian God, for example, says there's evil in the world and it's run by, what they call Satan, which actually is a title meaning the adversary, and all these like demons and all these bad things, right? Then where did they come from? And I'm sure like many different Christian frameworks and mythologies can explain it. But essentially, I think that's why I think when Christians are talking about God, they're talking about a different idea to what the Tantriks are, or even a lot of the New Age people when they talk about source, and because that envelops everything, right? And if God is everything and God is good or God is love, then everything, even the bad things that happen, are a necessary part of the framework of the cosmos for some reason, some mysterious reason that we don't understand. And you can see that in, for example, sexuality, how some people experience when they, if they have a kink, they like, 50 Shades of Grey kind of thing, for example. They like a bit of pain in the pleasure, right? And so duality in saying that like pain is bad and pleasure is good, there's often a fine line between these. Like, for example, if you look into Stoicism, the Stoics did like intense training methods where they could transmute pain into pleasure. And so these were, they call these people when they were kidnapped by other cultures crazy because they try to torture them and they'd enjoy it. And they're like, we can't torture these people. They like it. They like, these people are insane. But it's transmuting this idea. And so, it's that old, cliched analogy that says, okay, if like, killing is bad, then what if you're in the situation when someone was about to kill 10 children and you had the opportunity to kill them to save the 10 children, right? And and again, I'm just unpacking these things. So you might say, okay, no, killing on its own is bad, so you're not going to do it. But then if that is, this deity's will for you not to kill so that those 10 children live, then essentially it's that deity deciding that is the better option, that is the right thing to do for those 10 children to die, as opposed to that person who was going to kill them to die. If what you're saying is that that's what they want, because you're choosing to behave that way because that is in line with what that deity wants. So essentially what you're saying is the deity has a value that suits an agenda. So what is that deity's agenda? You know what I mean? It's a really multifaceted conversation, but essentially, that if that is a deity that you're, dedicating your life to, that's, could be problematic if that's what that deity's priorities are. And basically what I'm saying is that things aren't that black and white. And we have a tendency to, it's shown in even our movies and our culture, that, good versus evil. But I think we're starting to see movies and culture kind of evolve from this, even, for example, in some of the latest Star Wars films. In pretty much all the early Star Wars, it's like the Empire is bad and evil, and then the rebels are good and just. But then we see that what happens in like one of the troopers from the Empire, they have a moment where their whole squadron is killing all these innocent civilians, and they're like, this doesn't seem right. And they're like, why are we killing these civilians? And they experienced something that didn't add up. And then the whole story was that the Empire was creating all this propaganda in order, basically saying that the rebels are terrorists and that they are, doing all these terrible, evil things. And so, the people that were fighting for the Empire, which is considered the baddies, the bad guys, actually were brainwashed by this propagandic idea that the rebels were the bad guys. And so, and that's the thing, this is exactly what I'm trying to rectify, in that we all think we're the good guy. We all think we're in the right. And so I don't think, obviously there are people out there that do terrible, terrible things, and I'm not excusing that, and I do not agree with that. And I think those, we need to do things about those people. But also, maybe have a look at their background and their upbringing and what conditioning they've had. And, there will probably be something in there. And I think not opening up these conversations, is detrimental. And there's this idea in the spiritual world that you can't ask questions about things, that some things can't be explained. And I agree, some things can't be explained. I think there's this fundamental mystery to the universe in that, we have the known known, the unknown known, the known unknown, and the unknown unknown. But I think there remains, and always will remain, there's an unknown unknown to the universe. And that's why it is called the mystery. And that's why, magic schools or schools of thought are called mystery schools, because we're just trying to figure out the mystery together. But the issue I have is when someone says they have figured it out, and that theirs is right and everyone else's is wrong. And this might even seem hypocritical, because I'm urging you to see it from my perspective. But what I'm also inviting you to do is to see how far we can unpack this, right? And, it's a natural thing to unpack it. Like when you were a kid, I'm sure, your parents said something and you're like, but why? But why? But why? And, we have this, I'm not a parent, but if you're a parent and you've had this from the kid, there's probably a certain level where you're like, just stop. But this is actually a very healthy and obviously a very natural process, because as a child, they're like, but why, but why, but why? And I don't know if you've ever had this experience where you probably get to a point and you're like, actually, yeah, but why? Why do we do these things? Why do we say, why do we knock on wood after we say something? Why do we have these traditions or these habits that we do? Why is this thing labeled good? Why do people think of occultism and magic as dark and scary and even labeled evil and satanic and things like that, when what does that even mean? If you call something satanic, obviously you're saying that it's bad, but it's purely from it's a label meaning bad from a certain belief system, a certain mythic framework, a Christian framework. So some occultism and magical traditions could be in a pagan culture where they don't have that duality. They don't have that belief that something is good and something is bad. And it's interesting that there's even, I've delved deep into old Catholic grimoires and things like that. And there's even some where you'll, some angels, there's angels of death and angels of disease, and angels of there's angels that can do terrible, terrible things if you call on them. But people think, oh, they're angels, so they're good. And then demons that are bad. And then there's grimoires that you would summon what you would call a demon to heal somebody. Or there's demons that you'd summon just to find things that you've lost. There's Icelandic grimoires that's even just for mischief, that you would summon creatures, summon demons or whatever, to make people fart. There's literally there's probably more fart spells in these Icelandic grimoires than anything else. So, and that's an interesting thing as well with these Icelandic grimoires. You have to realize that different cultures saw things differently, in that, you would say from a Christian viewpoint that, say demons are bad, angels are good, God is bad, God is good, Satan is bad, etc., etc., because that's the framework, that's like the rules, right? The rules to the game. But when Christianity was introduced to these like heathen, mages, essentially, you find these grimoires or these spell books in Iceland that are they'll call on Thor, they'll call on Zeus, which are from different pantheons. So like Thor is obviously from the kind of Nordic, Germanic, and Zeus is from the kind of Greco-Roman idea. And then they would also call on Jesus in that same spell, and also call on like Beelzebub or Satan. So we have this spell, this one spell that could be to get a good harvest, right? Or to protect yourself, not necessarily even a bad thing, that is summoning Thor and Zeus and Jesus and like Beelzebub or Satan in the same breath, right? And so they didn't see these as good or bad. They saw that every one of them has a specific role. They have a specific archetype, something that they're good at. And they're like, well, they're apparently all really powerful, so I'm just going to call them all. And so viewing this idea of the word God as good is really just a viewpoint, a human viewpoint, depending on what they're doing. And this is also something that changed over time. These religious books have been altered over time, as I mentioned earlier. For example, making suicide, like suicide wasn't originally a sin, and then it got added into it later, because obviously if you tell everyone that as soon as they die they're going to live in paradise, if they're living in poverty, they're probably going to be pretty keen to just get it over and done with and head straight to paradise. And so these things change depending on flaws in a system, right? And it's like anything, you're creating a system and you find flaws in it, and so you rectify those flaws. And then say originally the sources were saying that God was omniscient. I'm probably going to get these words wrong, but also omnipotent. And I'm pretty sure omnipotent meant that they had power over everything, right? And so the issue there was a moral one, because if you're saying to follow this deity that has power over everything, but yet is allowing bad things to happen in the world, then essentially that deity is bad. That deity is evil, because it just basically gets off at torturing people and making people die and have bad experiences and all this sort of stuff, right? And so they actually remove that. They're like, actually, no, you're right. Well, we know they're good. So yeah, they actually don't have unlimited power anymore. They're not omnipotent. And that's where the struggle between, the devil and God comes into it. And you got to understand, these are all stories and myths and, a mix of like people just giving narratives to ideas and concepts, but then also them figuring out flaws that affected societies in ways that they didn't expect or didn't want, and editing that. And so I guess, again, I'm returning to what is actually important here. What are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to achieve the validation or the stamp of approval from this deity? And if so, why are you trying to get a stamp of approval from this deity? Is it because you fear that they're going to punish you for eternity if they don't? That, although valid, I understand why, it's not really like a nice way to live, and I wouldn't want to support a deity. It's just, cancel the deity who's trying to, like, you know what I mean? It's like, I feel like all these are just human concepts of what we believe are the right and wrong things to do. And if we are to just full circle back to what is God, or what is the divine, or what is the cosmos, and it is the thing that encompasses all the things, the good and the bad, and it's just experiencing this crazy cosmos, this crazy thing we call life. But we are all it. We are all exactly the same part of it, but we're just experiencing it from different vantage points. We're all experiencing from different parts. We're it's kind of like we're all kind of like eyes in this one big monster that we call the cosmos. I know that's a weird way to put it. This notion that we're separate is an illusion in the way that we're actually all connected. We're all the same thing, but we separate in order to be experienced, to have space, right? And this is why this idea of the triangle, like the 3 dimensions, is the thing that creates space for something to happen, right? Because if these are all crushed together, right, in order to create space for something to happen in, you need to have separate sides. So what I'm trying to say is, there's 3 main concepts that are in most mythologies, or really like belief systems, and that's like the perceiver of the thing that's being perceived, and then the environment that whole process is happening in, right? And so if the cosmos is everything, the cosmos is the perceiver, it's the thing that's being perceived, and it's also the thing that all this is happening in, right? And different ideas have different viewpoints of this. And so I just invite you to, perhaps unpack, like, are you saying of what you call God, is that the perceiver? Is it the thing that's perceiving everything? Is it the thing that is being perceived? Is it the thing that is everything is happening in? Or is it all 3? And if it is all 3, then what are we? Are we separate from that? Or are we a part of that? And if we are a part of that, what part are we of that? And if you think that there's some sort of hierarchy in that, this entity has more say, like, why? Just questioning these things. There's no right answer to this. And even this whole thing is just my viewpoint, and my viewpoint is constantly evolving. Because and I think the big thing that I didn't want to get into too much because it's a whole topic on its own, but like the big question here is what happens after we die, what we call dying, and our physical body dies, and that's the thing that scares everybody enough that we start to form these beliefs. And I understand why. Like I've been thinking about death since I was a kid. I used to, especially my girlfriends, I'd be like, I have conversations. I mentioned this in my first podcast I did, where telling my story that my high school girlfriend, I ended up realizing that she wasn't for me because I asked her that, like, don't you ever think about what the universe is and what happens when you die? And she's like, no, I never think about that. There's no point in thinking about that. And I was like, oh yeah, we're not really going to gel then. It's a natural thing to think about because it is the unknown. And like, even if this, God or something was to come down into a human body, our society these days would just think that person's crazy. And so essentially what I'm saying is there's no way of really knowing. Like what would be enough for you to convince you that either God does exist or it doesn't exist? Or that, like, what is that form and what does that even mean, right? Because your entire narrative around this idea, if someone came down and, said that they were a divine being in a body, that you would just go to whatever divine being you've heard of before this and give them that label. Whereas, the cosmos essentially is unlabelable. And that's why it's taken me probably around an hour to just speak of this one word. So I think that's a good time to just wrap it up. I'm sure there's lots of pieces that I meant to kind of talk about that I haven't. But hey, I'm sure you get more podcasts around this idea. Thank you so much for bearing with me, trying to paint this unpaintable picture. I hope it's made sense. I really welcome anyone who maybe wants to have a philosophical conversation about this, I guess, who's not going to, get too defensive about it and just try to convince me that I'm wrong, that is really genuinely open to having these kind of conversations. Have these conversations with your friends. Like, ask them, what do you mean by God? What do you mean by the word real? Which I'll unpack in another one. because what is real? Like, what justifies real for you? That you see it, that you hear it, that you experience it, that you feel something in your body? And if you feel something in your body, then essentially that's real, but maybe the label that you're giving it isn't the best label that you can give it, because there's so many different ways to label it. To find a way to give permission for other belief systems to exist. And please, stop calling other things evil just because someone told you that your deity, your God believes that, because how do you know? And you might say, oh, but I feel that way. It seems logical to me. It feels like natural to me, because you've installed that idea in your body from probably a young age. And if you're not willing to at least question it, why and what's the agenda behind that belief that either humans have or potentially a deity has, ask that deity why. If you really believe that deity, and if that deity, if the story behind that deity is like you don't question God or you don't question that deity, then I wouldn't want to be following someone who doesn't let me question them, personally. And again, that's just my path. And so how can we both walk our own individual paths without saying that the other person is wrong, and without fighting each other, and without trying to destroy each other, which, it's a horrible thing. Anyway, just my opinion. But yes, I hope that has been received the way that I intended it to be received, with love and compassion, and just the intention of bringing us all to a mutual respect and understanding of each other, so we can evolve as compassionate humans, and even have a laugh and a lightheartedness about this weird and crazy cosmos that has remained and probably will continue to remain mysterious in at least some of its aspects forever. And that's where the fun is. And that's why we get to share it and share our weird and wonderful experiences and ideas together. So thank you for tuning into this podcast. If you want to connect with me more, you can find me on Instagram or at my website, thehouseofmages.com. The links will be in this podcast description. And I welcome you to please communicate with me. Please, obviously, if you're offended or triggered by this, to do it compassionately as possible and logically and rationally as possible, and not just say I'm wrong. If you do think that I am wrong, please reference some sources, give me a detailed description of your opinion. Happy to even maybe possibly get you on and have a chat about it. I'm open to anything. So thank you, and make yoga magic again.